No one can believe what they're seeing in a new video clip about Rick Harrison's horrible life in prison. The video starts out blurry, but it's more powerful than any testimony in court or primetime interview. This footage will keep you glued to the screen. No one saw this coming for Rick Harrison, the former host of one of the most famous reality TV shows. Many people thought he would quietly fade into obscurity after his life sentence, which is what they thought he deserved. But these pictures have sparked it, made everyone curious. Was this really the end? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to keep up with this exciting story. But instead, the world saw the beginning of a horror movie, a man shackled not only by steel bars but also by his own mind. This left millions of people stunned and shaking, wondering if this was punishment or something worse. The first video was posted on an anonymous dark web forum with the name First Thought it was a hoax, but then clearer versions started showing up on TikTok, Telegram, and eventually X. It became painfully clear that the man in the video was Rick Harrison, thin, dirty, and unrecognizable. The man who used to walk confidently through the hallways of his famous Las Vegas pawn shop was now curled up in the corner of a crumbling jail cell, rocking slowly back and forth while holding a yellowed photo of the shop that made him famous. There was no sound in the original leak. Viewers later added crude subtitles saying they could read Rick's lips. They were never victims, they were just the forgotten ones of history. Once the phrase was decoded, it went viral on all social media sites. Some saw it as a confession, while others saw it as a sign of a complete mental breakdown. For the morbidly curious, it was the start of one of the worst public events in recent memory. To understand why this video has shocked the country, you must first understand who Rick Harrison was. He was born into poverty, had epilepsy as a child, and had to drop out of school, but he was determined to rise above it all. He turned a small pawn shop into an empire, and then into a TV dynasty. Millions admired his work ethic, business sense, and charm. In many ways, he was the American dream come true. But that dream was ruined when rumors of tax fraud turned into something much worse when a federal raid found a storage unit linked to Rick. Remains fake items connected to unsolved crimes, and an inventory list, scrolled in code Rick Harrison's empire, fell apart overnight. He was arrested in front of cameras, flashing with angry former employees. By the time his trial started, public opinion had turned against him. But what happened next was something that no one saw coming, even after he was found guilty. The prison footage that was leaked was not part of any official investigation and was not shown on 60 Minutes. Minutes or CNN, but supposedly came from inside, from a prison guard who was fed up with the system. This guard risked everything to smuggle the footage out, which not only showed Rick's current state, but also the brutality that led to his imprisonment. The pictures clearly show Rick to be thin, with sunken cheeks and a face that doesn't cover his body. He's not wearing a shirt, and the walls of his cell were covered in something dark, possibly old food or blood. The only thing that can be identified is on the floor next to his torn mattress was a photo that he wouldn't let go of. He rocked back and forth while mumbling words that didn't make sense toward the walls. Some people on the internet think this is proof that the incident was staged and that the system is trying to break him. Others say that he has finally felt the pain that he caused others through the crimes he was accused of. What's scary is that Rick never screams or cries. He just rocks and whispers. In a later clip, days after the original footage, a voice can be heard from behind the bars. It's not Rick, but another prisoner yelling at him, "Pong King, where's your mom?" Then there's the clear sound of something heavy and wet being thrown against the bars. Rick doesn't seem to be bothered by this. He just looks up with his eyes closed and says, "History." In less than a week, the video had been watched over 140 million times, and hashtags like #Ponsol and #HowWhatRickenhell became popular all over the world. But among meme makers and internet comedians, something more serious began to stir. Well-known human rights activists began to pay attention. and an open letter from Amnesty International was posted, calling for an immediate investigation into how Harrison was being treated. The letter also pointed out other troubling patterns in the prison, such as sentences being repeated at night and Harrison being put in solitary confinement for no reason. Then the rumors came out that turned everything upside down. There were more videotapes, and that the footage that the world had seen was just a glimpse of the real horror that happened every day behind bars. Guards were said to have been told to psychologically destroy Rick's sense of identity through carefully planned manipulation. He was allegedly shown deeply fake footage of his son Corey making fun of him. He was reportedly fed food that was laced with drugs, and prisoners were paid with cigarettes to taunt the guards. All of these rumors have not been proven true, but they added to the chaos of the story. TikTok videos analyzing every move Rick made in the video went viral, and people said they saw Morse code being tapped on the wall. One video with over 30 million views said Rick blink, a secret message asking for help. Others thought the prison may have staged the video as a form of psychological warfare against the public as an experiment in indifference. Channel took down all episodes of Pawn Stars from its streaming service without saying anything. Several news outlets tried to interview Corey Harrison's son Rick and his co-stars, but they all turned down the requests. When TMZ reporters pressed Corey at a gas station, he just said no comment and drove off. But silence speaks for itself, and the internet became louder. Some people called for Rick's immediate release, saying that no one, no matter how bad their crimes, should have to go through such torture. This was karmic punishment for the lives Harrison is said to have destroyed with his greed, manipulation, and never-ending desire for fame. So what is the truth? Was Rick Harrison a misunderstood genius who broke the law to preserve history? Or was he a cold-blooded criminal hiding behind the charm of Americana? Is this leaked footage a cry for help or a cruel film version of punishment? One thing is for sure, the man in that prison cell is not the Rick Harrison you used to know. Rick Harrison is no longer the pawn shop king who made a lot of money during the Civil War or the face of hustle in Las Vegas. He is now a prisoner of time for the very machine that made and broke him, and everyone is watching. Rick Harrison wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. In fact, if you told someone in the 1960s in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina, that a kid like Rick would one day become the face of a multimillion-dollar TV brand, most would laugh. His story isn't glamorous. He struggled with illness, learning problems, and money problems, but that's exactly what makes him so famous. He's the archetype of the average American hustler, someone who started with almost nothing and built an empire through hard work and intelligence. But looking back, there were probably always signs that something darker was going on beneath the surface of that empire. That ambition that is often praised can always be the difference between brilliance and crime. Rick was born on March 22, 1965, in Lexington, North Carolina. As a child, he was diagnosed with epilepsy, which meant he missed a lot of school. Most kids fall behind, but Rick used his time off to learn on his own. He spent many hours by himself reading books about history, weapons, and collectibles. His early fascination with rare and unusual items would later shape his brand, but at the time, he was just a kid trying to make sense of the world. His family moved to San Diego. Finally, he settled down in Las Vegas, Nevada, a city that was full of risk, deceit, and illusions, perfect for a future pawn king. In the early 1980s, Rick and his father Richard Benjamin Harrison opened a gold and silver pawn shop with money they had earned from other pawn shops. It wasn't exactly a glamorous job. Pawn shops are often rough and full of desperate people. But Rick saw opportunity in the chaos. He didn't just want to sell old things for cash. He wanted to make pawn brokering a form of entertainment. and he knew it was after years of pitching his idea. The History Channel finally gave him the go-ahead in 2009. That decision changed everything. Pawn Stars became an instant cultural phenomenon, not just about the things that were bought and sold, but also about the stories behind them. There was a sword from the Civil War, an 18th century map, and guitars from long dead legends. The show mixed nostalgia with commerce, and Rick was at the center of it all. He was the host with the constant smirk, and knew a lot about everything from classic slot machines to Abraham Lincoln's personal belongings. The show not only got a lot of viewers, but it also started a movement. Tourists started flooding the gold and silver pawn shop by the hundreds every day, and the goods were flying off the shelves. Rick Harrison was no longer just a businessman, he was now a brand. He did ads, organized talks, and went to political events for over a decade, and his image became linked to the strong will and business sense of honest Americans. But what fans didn't see behind the scenes was the growing despite Rick's appearance of stability. Inside the pawn shop, things were getting worse. Employee turnover rates went up, long-term employees started going missing without a trace, and even the film crew reported strange behavior, delays in filming, unexplained financial problems, and growing legal concerns about the authenticity of the items being bought and sold on TV. In 2017, quiet lawsuits started to pile up. Former employees said Rick lied about their pay, messed with their ratings, and forced them to keep quiet about shady business dealings. Most of these lawsuits were settled out of court with no public knowledge, just NDA, and the complainants went away. Then there was the first major hole in the facade. A Nevada news story revealed that Rick had transferred over $2.3 million through offshore accounts using shell companies linked to the sale of fake memorabilia. The article was mostly ignored by mainstream media, which wrote it off as a plot or anger from former business partners. But federal investigators did not write it off. In 2019, an oversight by the IRS led to a quiet audit. That audit led to an arrest warrant, and the arrest led to a raid on a storage unit rented by a company connected to Rick's pawn shops. What they found inside changed everything. Fake Picasso paintings, fake war medals, and human remains wrapped in plastic with partially recognizable tags that were connected to unsolved cases in Las Vegas and Arizona were found in a binder labeled Recovered Assets. This binder had photos of what looked like excavation sites, possibly graves, and records of items that had been dug up. Investigators also found a handwritten journal that they think was written by Rick. It had disturbing thoughts about keeping stories alive that people wanted to hear. The country was shocked. The man who used to charm celebrities and captivate millions of viewers every week on TV was now facing multiple charges, including tax evasion, money laundering, tampering with evidence, and trafficking stolen historical artifacts. More disturbing questions arise. Are these crimes connected to Rick? Who are these victims? Is something darker going on? Rick's arrest in early 2020 was dramatic. He was surrounded by federal agents outside of a pawn shop, but witnesses say he only raised his hands and he was handcuffed in front of a crowd of tourist extras, some of whom still had signed copies of his best-selling memoir licensed to pawn. The public's reaction was swift and harsh. At first, some loyal fans refused to believe the accusations, but more and more evidence from a video of the storage unit showing dangerous material handling teams pulling out crates started to turn the tide. His last defenders stopped speaking out, and the History Channel immediately canceled the show. Gold and silver sponsors for the pawn shop cut ties with Rick, and business partnerships fell apart. Then there was the trial, a long-running courtroom drama that didn't hide anything and showed more than most people thought it would. Prosecutors showed shocking financial trails that showed millions of dollars were laundered through charities and Shell LLC. some registered in the Cayman Islands and others under the names of dead people. Witnesses included former appraisers and forensic historians, and even grieving families who said Rick had bought stolen heirlooms related to their missing loved ones. The accusations were no longer just financial. They were personal and truly horrifying. The most damning evidence came from an immunity witness who said Rick not only sold fake artifacts, but also knew that some of them were connected to ongoing investigations. He said Rick would often joke, "The dead don't tell tales, but their stuff sells like hotcakes." The jury found Rick guilty of all charges in less than 5 hours, which shocked major news outlets. The judge made it clear that Rick didn't just cheat banks or break the public's trust. He also trafficked in death and stole history for profit. He was now going to be remembered not as a businessman but as a cautionary tale. Rick Harrison was given a life sentence without the chance of parole. The once happy TV host was now a convicted criminal chained at the ankle. Many people thought that was the end of the story, but it wasn't. The empire may have fallen, the shop may have closed, and the man may have disappeared behind concrete walls and barbed wire fences. But the truth still got out. What happens next, what comes out from behind those prison walls, will turn this cautionary tale into something much darker, something that not even the harshest critics could have predicted. A man can lose everything and still stay sane, but Rick Harrison, as the world was about to learn, it all began with whispers and ended with headlines. As the truth about Rick Harrison's alleged crimes came to light, it felt like the whole country was being sucked into a vortex of doubt. What began as a simple tax evasion case quickly turned into something much more sinister, troubling, and ultimately puzzling. What shocked America wasn't just the severity of the charges, but the fact that Rick, a man who was invited into millions of living rooms every week, might have lived a double life. Federal prosecutors say Rick reported making over $7 million over an 8-year period. This money was allegedly laundered through various shell companies, including money from overseas sales, black market deals involving rare artifacts, and secret dealings that were never officially recorded through his tax return. The first public charge was tax fraud, which is common for famous people and wasn't enough to bring down a media empire. But the investigators weren't done yet. They had just begun. A few weeks later, a sealed federal indictment was leaked to the press, revealing a list of new charges that included tax evasion, international money laundering, conspiracy to defraud, forgery of historical documents, and trafficking stolen property. The illegal possession of human remains was the charge that got the most attention across the country and caused a storm on the internet. Everything in the storage unit had been moved to a small temperature-controlled facility registered under an LLC named Recollector Holdings. On paper, it was just another collectibles storage business, but in reality, it was where all of Rick's darkest secrets were kept. During a raid, federal agents found the unit full of wooden crates lining the walls. Each crate had been carefully labeled and vacuum-sealed in plastic. The labels ranged from harmless Civil War buttons, presidential lapel pins, signed vinyl records, and strange bone fragments. There were historical artifacts and what forensic experts later identified as real human remains in the crates. Some of the remains were preserved, while others were breaking down. There were also papers that linked many of the remains to unsolved disappearances in Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. One crate had 2 skulls with handwritten tags on their jawbones. One said John Doe found outside Elko in 2006 unclaimed, and the other just said history. This strange and unclear phrase would follow investigators throughout the case. It became clear from interviews with police that Rick's actions weren't just about making money, but also about something much deeper and more psychological. A deeper investigation revealed a journal Rick had kept for years called Artifacts of the Forgotten. It was written in small, dense handwriting and contained his ideas on preserving forgotten stories, his dislike of pop history, and his belief that he was the Inhumane entry, he said, "History doesn't just live in books. It lives in the dust, in bones, in things no one wants to remember. I collect so the world doesn't forget." Once this journal was proven to be real, it became the main evidence for the prosecution's case that Rick Harrison wasn't just a greedy person taking advantage of a broken system, but also someone who had crossed moral and ethical lines beyond repair. He used his fame and access to not only get rich, but also to do bad things. The case turned into a maze when it came out that Rick had sold fake celebrity memorabilia related to at least 3 deaths. One item was a lock of hair that was said to belong to Marilyn Monroe, but DNA testing showed it was not only fake, but also taken from an unidentified female corpse stored in the same facility. The trial turned into a circus as prosecutors called in forensic anthropologists and expert examiners. Sudden and shocking discoveries were made. Testimony in court: retired FBI agents said they found a money laundering scheme involving 3 continents and offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. They also said that fake charities were set up to protect historical artifacts, while money was sent to private safes and secret bank vaults. In the pawn shop, a safe was found hidden behind a false wall that held over $2 million in cash that couldn't be tracked and a bundle of human teeth wrapped in an American flag. Testimonies from former employees: one said that Rick kept useless items in a secret basement below the pawn shop. Another said that they heard strange sounds coming from the basement late at night, like moans or voices far away. When asked why they hadn't come forward earlier, many witnesses said they were afraid of retaliation and non-disclosure agreements. One former appraiser who worked on Pawn Stars said that Rick often asked them to inflate the value of known fake items and then pushed them. Not only did they want to make the items more valuable for the show, but they also used it to launder money by passing off fake items as real ones and sometimes trading real items for fakes before the appraisal was over. But it was the bodies that got the most attention from the public. Medical examiners said that at least 4 sets of bones found in Rick's belongings showed signs of surgery done after death, like someone tried to put together different bones. One skull was mounted on a wooden plaque like a hunting trophy. Experts confirmed that the skull had been precisely sawed, lacquered, and engraved with the phrase "truth has a face." Despite the horrifying evidence, Rick's silence during the trial made it even worse. He didn't say much, and his lawyers said he was mentally ill, while the prosecution said this was a deliberate attempt to silence him before sentencing. Rick refused, staring at the floor with a face as cold as money. The only time the silence was broken when the prosecutors showed a clip from Pawn Stars in the closing arguments. In that episode, Rick talked about how important it is to be real. He gave off a strange look that people said was just a faint smile that went away almost instantly. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before coming to a unanimous decision. Rick Harrison was found guilty of all major charges, including tax evasion. Judge gave him a life sentence without parole for trafficking stolen goods, lying about historical records, abusing human remains, obstructing justice, and plotting to defraud. He called his actions a cold blend of opportunism, deceit, and human exploitation disguised as preservation of history. The nation went silent. Media outlets struggled to describe the scope of the case. Analysts compared this trial to those of famous people like Bernie Madoff or Jeffrey Dahmer, not because of similar crimes, but because of it wasn't just a fall from grace. It was a plunge into darkness, with each new revelation more upsetting than the last. The phrase "worse than death" started to trend, not because of the crimes, but because of leaked information about the upcoming prison footage. Before that footage came out, Rick Harrison was sentenced to something that could be called scarier than death: complete isolation, the erasure of culture, and a legacy that would never be the same. The man who had once turned history into a market had become the public wasn't just interested in Rick Harrison's trial. It consumed them. By the time the opening statement was given, the courtroom had become a theater of skepticism. Legal experts called it the trial of the decade, not just because of the hype, I'll defendant, but also because of the absolute complexity, horror, and overlapping psychological plots throughout the case. The prosecution called it a systematic. The defense said Rick was a collector who was obsessed with the past and not corrupt. No one was ready for what happened over the next 7 weeks. The trial took place in a high-security federal courthouse in downtown Las Vegas and was attended by a rotating cast of media figures, legal scholars, and even celebrities, many of whom had been on Pawn Stars and were now trying to figure out how to connect with a man who was seen as a modern. The courtroom had to be specially designed with extra seating and security. People started waiting outside before dawn in hopes of getting one of the few spots in the courtroom. The scene outside the courtroom and Rick's transformation, camping outside the courthouse, social media went crazy with daily updates. Rick arrived every morning under armed guard, shackled and silent. He had lost weight, his face was now gaunt and expressionless, and his hair was thinning and graying more than ever. He rarely made any noise. The man who used to smile wildly on national TV now stared straight ahead as if he was already serving his sentence in his mind. The prosecution started with a bang by showing a photo from the storage unit. It showed 2 human skulls next to each other, each with a handwritten tag on the jawbone. There were whispers in the courtroom as the lead prosecutor stood up and said, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not a case about television. This case is about bones, blood, and betrayal." The prosecution painted a clear picture of Rick Harrison's fall into illegal activity. Email chains, shipping logs, and handwritten ledgers were used to show how artifacts were bought, misvalued, and sold. A series of videos showed Rick negotiating with pawn shop stars for specific items, many of which the prosecutors said had been swapped or improperly authenticated. However, the testimonies were what gave the case its emotional weight. First, forensic accountants, historians, archivists, and artifact specialists talked about how Rick had broken the law, laundered money, and faked provenance documents to make his items more valuable. One expert said that nearly 40% of the items shown on Pawn Stars had questionable origins or authenticity. For example, a Civil War rifle was traced back to a prop shop in Las Vegas. Next, former employees, pawn shop staff, and crew members from the show talked about a secret culture within the one cameraman, said that Rick would sometimes whisper to him, "Make it sparkle no matter what," when he wasn't sure if an item was real. Another worker who was in charge of shipping said that items sent to international buyers were often changed after appraisal and replaced with cheaper copies, while the originals were kept to be sold to individuals again. The most emotional testimony came from the families of unidentified. One woman sobbed as she talked about how her brother went missing in 2012, and then his work showed up in a storage unit. Another man talked about how his mother's bracelet was stolen in a robbery and then put up for sale on an online auction site that no longer exists. These witnesses not only put the pieces together, but they also gave specifics about what happened. It wasn't just numbers or paperwork, it was about people's lives, trauma, and trust being broken. The defense fought back, but the attacks kept coming. They said Rick had undiagnosed obsessive compulsive disorder, and he became addicted to collecting. His desire to preserve history had turned into a psychological dependence. His lawyers said that he never meant to hurt anyone and that his actions, while questionable, were caused by emotional disorders rather than malicious greed. They even read out loud from Rick's personal journal, which was full of random thoughts about history, heritage, and loneliness. One entry that was read out loud said, "People don't want the truth. If they want a version of the past that makes them feel good, I just give it to them. Cleaned up, framed, and polished." The defense tried to show Rick as a man who became lost in the myth he created and lost control of the story he made up. They stressed that he had no criminal record, health problems, and contributions to historical education. A psychiatrist testified that Rick was severely disconnected from reality and should be institutionalized instead of jailed. The prosecution strongly disagreed. They showed surveillance footage of Rick personally overseeing the packing of changed products, as well as emails in which Rick tells appraisers to make up stories about things to make them more valuable. Perhaps most shocking was evidence that Rick had contacted a man on the dark web to ask about off-market storage solutions for fragile inventory, with a reference to human remains that the prosecution said was meant to be cryptic. The courtroom was shocked that Rick had not only done something wrong, but also seemed so cold and deliberate. By the 5th week, the trial had turned into a spectacle that people couldn't stop watching. The term Pawn Star Predator became popular, with news outlets analyzing every testimony and podcasts devoted solely to the trial launching overnight. Products even started being made, like fake real bones t-shirts and pins with the phrase "preserve this." During the whole trial, Rick didn't say a word, testify, or apologize. He also didn't look at the jury once. His lawyers said this was because his mental health was getting worse, but other people weren't sure if it was just a lack of shame or a more sinister ego that wouldn't admit anything, even if it meant falling apart. The prosecution ended with a simple slideshow showing photos of each victim whose body was found in as each picture was shown. The prosecutor read the person's name, the date they went missing, and the last known location. The room went silent. There were no tricks or showmanship, just the truth, the faces, and a haunting reminder that history is not made by collectors, but by those who deserve to be remembered honestly. The jury went away to think about it for 6 hours, and when they came back, they all found Rick guilty on all charges. When the judge told Rick his sentence, his voice was calm, but he was angry. "Mr. Harrison, you did not just use history for your own gain, you violated it. You turned truth into a commodity and profited off of pain. In doing so, you crossed the line between curiosity and cruelty." Rick was given a life sentence without the chance of parole. He didn't say anything other than a small shift in his chair. His son Corey, as well as other family members and former coworkers, were not in the courtroom. This was the end of Rick Harrison's public trial, but what no one expected was that the story was just the beginning. America was shocked by what happened in that courtroom. The fact that it happened inside a prison made it even scarier. Gavel had just made the last move when Rick Harrison was led from the courtroom to a secure prison transport vehicle waiting outside the courthouse. He was strapped to his wrists and ankles and put into a plain white box truck with reinforced steel windows. This time there were no reporters, no red carpet with flashing cameras, just as the truck drove off, the sound of steel and the distant hum of the engine carried the remains of a man who was once admired by millions. Rick was taken to a federal prison in an undisclosed area of the Southwest. It was a maximum security facility known for its harsh conditions and brutal treatment of high-risk prisoners. The name of the prison is still redacted from official documents, but we know that it's a place for people who are thought to be high-risk escapees, and there were leaked reports about Rick's behavior from the moment he walked into the building. He was searched thoroughly, cleaned with chemicals, and given a psychological evaluation that lasted less than 15 minutes. His personal belongings, including the few things he was allowed to bring with him, were taken away, and he was given a gray jumpsuit, old boots, and a thin blanket. His cell, which was 6 feet by 9 feet, had rusted metal bars and a cracked concrete floor. There were no books or pins. Rick Harrison's first meal was a tray of boiled cabbage, gray mashed beans, and a cup of warm water. Witnesses say he barely touched his food, not because he wasn't getting enough to eat in prison, but because he just couldn't bring himself to eat. His face was pale, and he still couldn't believe what was happening. After years of running his empire, Rick Harrison was now completely in the hands of the government. But it wasn't just the system that was against him. It was also those who inside information quickly spread among the prisoners. "The Pawn Star guy is here." On Rick's first night, a former inmate who is now under witness protection said that the other prisoners made fun of him by banging on the walls and yelling insults like, "Tell us how much my kidney is worth now, Pawn King." Someone yelled into the darkness, "You sold the dead, now you're one of us." But Rick didn't answer. He sat in the corner of his cell with his knees pulled to his chest, muttering random words and having random thoughts about catalog numbers, dust, and crates with no labels. During his first week, Rick was put under suicide watch twice because of his crazy behavior. At one point, he tried to flush his blanket down the toilet and screamed that it was full of lies. Another time, he tried to hang himself to carve something into the wall with a broken food tray. The scratches were later confirmed by a forensic linguist to look like an old form of Morse code. The full message could not be confirmed, but he was not immediately put with the other prisoners because officials were worried about his safety, which was understandable since high-risk prisoners are often targets. But even while he was alone, he was still being harassed by guards who were heard playing recordings of old Pawn Stars episodes over the intercom. One report said they edited the sound to add muffled screams and distorted whispers below Rick's voice. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to keep up with the shocking new information about Rick Harrison's life in prison and the strange events that happened around him. Physical and mental decline. Rick started to lose weight quickly. The man who used to eat fancy dinners in Vegas was now shrinking, his face gaunt and his hands shaking from shaking. Later leaked medical records showed he had lost almost 30 pounds in just the first month. His hair became brittle, his gums bled, and sores showed up on his arms, possibly from stress or the dirty conditions. But what was even scarier were the signs of a mental breakdown. By the third week, Rick was said to be talking to someone who wasn't there, calling this person Chester, which could have been a reference to a real person or a distorted product of his broken mind. He would sometimes argue with this person. Sometimes he would be very angry with Chester and whisper to Chester, "They don't know Chester. They don't know what we've saved." Psychiatrists in prison wrote in their logs that Rick had severe dissociative disorder and delusions caused by trauma. Instead of getting treatment, he was put in solitary confinement for 14 days, without any sunlight and with food pushed through a small hole in the door. For those 14 days, all he could hear was the sound of dripping water and distant horses laughing. When Rick showed up, he had cuts on his arms and what looked like blood under his fingernails. He wouldn't talk, wouldn't blink for long periods of time, and wouldn't answer when called by name. Then one day, he erupted. According to a guard who was cleaning the lower levels, Rick started screaming wildly for almost 30 minutes, talking about deals with dead price tags on bones and an empire that never sleeps. His angry words were recorded by a guard's body camera and were later used in an internal investigation. The video shows Rick ripping his clothes, scratching at the walls, and finally collapsing in the corner of his cell, crying uncontrollably. After this outburst, he was sedated, and when he woke up, he saw a picture taped to the inside of his cell door. It was a scene from the first season of Pawn Stars, and Rick was smiling next to his father, his son Corey, and their longtime friend Chumley. It said, "I sold my soul for this," in red marker on the picture. No one took responsibility. As Rick's mental health got worse, the system around him became stricter. He got less medical care, less psychological support, and guards enjoyed making him angry. Some were said to have sprayed bleach near his bed while he was sleeping, and others left cryptic messages on his food tray, such as "judged by God" and "priceless pain." It was clear that Rick Harrison was not a normal prisoner. He was a symbol of betrayal and the corrupted greed of America. In this prison, he was a symbol of decline and the creepy video. It wasn't rehabilitation or even legal punishment. It was something worse, a breaking down. A man who used to sell nostalgia now only had memories to hold on to. Everything changed when the video was uploaded to the internet. It wasn't shown on TV, there were no official announcements or early leaks from tabloids or clickbait blogs. The video showed up as a ghost in the machine on a dark web forum called The Forgotten Pawn, uploaded anonymously. The video had no description and no context. In less than an hour, it was downloaded hundreds of times and shared in 6 clips on TikTok and Telegram. By the end of the day, the video had gone viral in every sense of the word. That night, it was impossible to avoid the footage on social media, with reactions flooding in from all over the internet. Hashtags went crazy for H-Pawn, still alive, Rick Harrison footage hashed worse than death. What people saw wasn't shock, but a picture of a cheap surveillance camera inside Rick Harrison's cell caught his mental breakdown on video. The video was about 7 minutes long and began with blurry footage of the cell. The timestamp in the top corner showed that it was recorded at 3:47 a.m. There was no sound, just the buzzing of static and occasional flickers from the camera's light sensor. Rick Harrison was sitting in the far corner of the cell, almost naked, hunched over against the wall. His hair was long and matted, and his beard was untidy. His body looked thin, with ribs sticking out. He had pale skin, and his fingers twitched in a strange, repetitive motion as he held a torn small photograph in one hand. The edges of the photograph were damaged by water curling, as if it had been held too many times. He didn't move for almost 2 minutes, just swaying in a rhythmic way. Then, out of the blue, he looked up and started mumbling something. There was no sound in the video, but amateur lip readers online started analyzing it right away. What they said he said has been forensic video analysts confirmed. They were never the victims, they are history. I preserved what the world threw away. He said the phrase several times, sometimes whispering and sometimes staring wide-eyed and frantically. Each time he said it, it seemed like he was trying more desperately to convince himself of a forgotten truth. The camera panned slightly, either on purpose or by accident, capturing the walls behind him in his cell. They were dirty with grime and something darker at first. Viewers thought it was mold or food waste, but later, former inmates who knew the facility confirmed that it was dry blood from Rick and the people who had been there before him. At the 426-second mark, Rick jerked and dropped the picture. He began to pace around his small cell, muttering at the wall and punching the corner. He then turned to face the camera, his eyes wide open and bloodshot, staring directly into the lens without saying anything. He then smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. There was no pride or enjoyment in his face, just a slow, crooked grin that shocked people. It was a look that seemed to ask, "Now do you understand?" Then, the moment that broke the internet, a barely audible voice shouted, "Where's your mom now, Pawn King?" Rick flinched and backed away like a scared dog, curling into a ball in the corner of his cell. A second later, something brown and slimy splattered onto the bars of his cell. Some people said it was food, while others thought it was feces. Either way, the stain was clear, but Rick didn't do anything. He closed his eyes and started humming a creepy childish tune that some viewers later recognized as a slow version of the Star-Spangled Banner. At 6:02, he started talking again, but this time to the photo. "They're coming," he said. "You're not forgotten. I've named each of you. Now you'll be safe. In the cup, in the cup." His hand shook as he held the photo like it was a holy object. Suddenly, he started whispering something over and over in a strange voice. "Chester opened the vault." The name, Chester, had never been publicly linked to Rick until this moment. But viewers would later learn that investigators had found a small statue named Chester in Rick's private office during the raid on the storage facility. This statue was a ceramic figure used in the rare episodes of Pawn Stars that Rick had joked about calling his business conscience. Now it seemed that Chester had a connection to Rick. The video abruptly ended with Rick curled up in the corner, holding the picture to his chest and swaying to the beat of the hum. The footage and the terrifying spread were louder than any screen in 24 hours. The video was shown on all major news outlets. CNN called it the most haunting inmate footage ever leaked, and Rolling Stone called it the real-time collapse of America's favorite con artist. TikTok users started editing reactions, with some crying and others laughing. Before, Twitter went crazy with second-by-second analyses of the video. People asked what Rick was really trying to say. Was he crazy, regretful, or manipulative? One user pointed out a scary detail. The photo he was holding looked like it had a name rolled on the back with enhanced filters. Detectives thought it said Michael C., but this wasn't confirmed. Some people thought it might be a reference to Michael Connor, a man from Nevada who went missing in 2011 and whose dental records matched a portion of Rick. A skull was found in Rick's storage unit, which led to a lot of theories. Some people thought Rick was trying to talk to the outside world, while others thought the whole thing was staged by the prison to break his spirit or by Rick himself in an attempt to get public sympathy. What was even more disturbing were the claims of a prison worker who was later fired and detained. The guard said that the video was just one of many sessions that were recorded, and that guards had access to dozens of videos. What was even more disturbing, he said, at one point, Rick tried to pull out his own fingernails. On another occasion, he wrote names and blood on the floor of his cell. These were the names of the victims, or at least the names of the people whose names were on the video, which, according to an insider, had been used as a form of internal humiliation and played over and over again during guard shifts with morbid curiosity. They had turned him into a grotesque spectacle. Whistleblowers said he was no longer an inmate, he was just public entertainment. Some viewers were horrified and really felt sorry for him. Some people on TikTok said, "I don't care what he did, this is psychological torture." Others were more brutal. He locked people in boxes and now he lives with them. One person wrote, "Karma doesn't miss." Human rights groups released a statement calling for a full federal investigation into the video, which they say could violate the Eighth Amendment's protections against cruel and unusual punishment. The ACLU called the video very alarming, and the UN Human Rights Council called for the U.S. prison system, promised transparency, but there were no official comments or statements from the Department of Corrections. There was also no confirmation of who leaked the video, and the silence only made things worse. Then came the final blow. A strange quote from the video showed up on T-shirts, protest signs, and hashtags. "They're not victims, they're history. I preserved what the world wanted to forget." This quote became famous, and conspiracy theorists, anti-government activists, and nihilists repeated it online. Some saw it as others thought that Rick's confession was the first step in a bigger reveal of what he really believed. He wasn't a criminal, he was the keeper of dark secrets. So far, no more footage has been made public, but rumors continue that there is much more. If the next video gets out, it will contain something worse, something that can't be watched, something that might make people ask, what if Rick Harrison isn't just a man who fell? What if he was trying to warn us all? When the video of Rick Harrison in his cell first went viral, the internet was split into two groups. Those who saw a man completely broken by guilt, and those who thought it was a performance meant to gain public sympathy and get out of his sentence. But as more information came out, it became clear that Rick's condition wasn't the result of a single emotional moment, but rather the slow erosion of his mind under extreme psychological pressure. There are now controversial questions about Rick's. The controversial public question wasn't whether Rick Harrison was suffering, but what he was suffering from. Was he really losing touch with reality and going crazy? Or was this behavior just a way for him to protect himself from what had become a terrible nightmare when he was awake? To answer that, you need to know about the world Rick Harrison entered when he went to prison, especially the kind of prison that is only for high-profile or dangerous people. Prison is not just a place where people are locked up. It's to take away identity, purpose, and personality. In Rick's case, his whole life had been based on how others saw him, valued him and listened to him. But now there was no one listening, no cameras to charm, and no deals to seal the silence and the memory. Experts who looked at the leaked footage saw signs of severe dissociation. Dr. Mara Jensen, a clinical psychologist who works with prisoners who have experienced trauma, saw clear signs of dissociative disorder in Rick's doctor. Mara Jensen says that Rick's behavior is textbook fragmentation. When someone is constantly stressed, embarrassed, and alone, their mind starts to protect itself by creating layers of reality within reality. Behaviors like rocking, talking to inanimate objects, and repeating phrases are all signs that someone is retreating into a mental space where they can exercise some form of control. In Rick's case, that control seems to show up in the form of ritual rocking and muttering. Clinging to a picture. All of these things show that the man is trying to hold on to something that reminds him of the person he used to be, or maybe what he thinks he still is. One disturbing thing about the video is how often Rick says, "They are not victims, they are history." Some criminologists have a more nuanced view of this phrase. This phrase is not for the public. It is not a justification. It is an echo of Rick's inner monologue. He may have been telling himself this for years while doing things he knew were wrong. When someone repeats something in a state of psychological distress, Dr. Eric Thomas, a psychiatrist who specializes in trauma, says it is often a mantra, a way to create emotional distance from the original event. That's not all. Rick talks to an imaginary character named Chester a lot. Sometimes they're nice, but other times they're angry. It seems like Chester was created from Rick's delusions and guilt. As for who or what Chester represents, some think it's a separate personality, a broken part of his mind that lets him separate his actions from who he is, while others think Chester is a real person, maybe someone Rick used to work with. One popular theory says that Chester is Rick's moral compass, which has been buried under years of denial and is now coming back to life as a voice in his head judging, warning, and punishing him. No matter who it is, Chester's presence serves a clear purpose to fill the void of isolation in solitary confinement, where sensory deprivation is used as a form of discipline, and the mind compensates by creating auditory stimuli, voices, and even full-on hallucinations. Rick may have made Chester as his last line of defense because he was lonely and being humiliated. But not everyone thinks Rick's mental decline was accidental. A growing number of internet theorists and behavioral analysts say Rick's mental decline was intentional, citing his background in acting, the calculated persona he kept up on Pawn Stars, his knowledge of how to control a story, and years of manipulating negotiations for entertainment and profit. Could this be true? A former TV producer who worked with Rick during the early seasons of Pawn Stars said anonymously that he thought Rick always knew how to play an audience. He could fake weakness if he had to. He could cry on cue. I'm not saying he's pretending now, but if anyone could do it, it would be him. Most mental health experts disagree with this theory. They say that the footage doesn't make sense. Rick didn't show any signs of self-awareness or knowing that the cameras were watching him. Instead, his behavior was erratic, fragmented, and much more personal, suggesting that he was stuck in a trauma loop instead of writing his own redemption story. Reports from inside the prison, from guards and former staff, painted a bleak picture. One whistleblower said Rick was put on a seditious regimen strong enough to slow his motor functions. Another said he often refused to eat instead. He couldn't stop writing messages in napkins or on the floor that no one could understand. He thought he was still holding on to something. One guard said he talked about the basement as if it were a holy place. It could have been the shop, or maybe the word vault kept showing up in Rick's speech in the leaked video. Chester opened the vault that had been sealed, but these references, along with his behavior, point to an illusion that may have been based in secrecy. Some psychologists think that this vault could represent Rick's guilt or his need to put the horrible things he had seen and caused into categories. Others see it as a metaphor for his empire, which was gone but still safe in his mind. This supports the idea that he really fell apart mentally. By the second month of his confinement, he was reportedly not responding to his own name. Even though he showed signs of mental illness like unprovoked tremors, psychological hallucinations, and hours-long fits where he couldn't speak, the system kept him locked up with no therapy or transfer to a psychiatric facility. Just cameras and concrete walls, with the occasional mean jokes from a guard. The public's reaction is still swinging back and forth like a pendulum. On one side, there are those who see a man being destroyed by justice, which is the only fair outcome for someone who has harmed and benefited from his past. On the other, on one side are people who question whether it's moral to watch a man's mind fall apart in real time, no matter what crimes he committed. A popular post on social media perfectly summed up the conflict. Rick Harrison deserves punishment, but what we're seeing is not justice, it's cruelty. How can we call ourselves a civilized society if we treat even the guilty this way? In response, others posted pictures of the bodies found in his storage with the caption, "They didn't survive. Why should he?" In the end, the video showed more than just Rick Harrison's mental breakdown. It also showed a system ready to push a man to the edge of madness, a public hungry for spectacle, and a culture still figuring out the line between punishment and torture. Did Rick Harrison really lose his mind, or did he choose to give up? One thing that is certain is that the man who used to trade Civil War rifles and Elvis memorabilia now lives in a world without any meaning or hope, where the only thing left is a shattered memory that will never end. In the high-security prisons where Rick Harrison is being held, the prison itself had a reputation that had been shrouded in darkness and silence for a long time. Officially, the facility had not been named in the federal disclosures. It was only known by its number code. But among former inmates, prison staff, and legal experts, it was known by a different name, Black Veil. Built decades ago in a remote desert region, the prison was originally meant to house some of the country's most dangerous federal criminals. It was designed to erase people who were mentally unstable or at high risk for violent federal acts. It had high walls, soundproof rooms, infrared cameras, and automatic cell doors that were programmed to stay locked during critical hours. Unlike places that are meant to help people get better, this was meant to erase people. When video of Rick Harrison's mental decline was released, attention finally turned to the prison itself and the dark world that let that video exist. After the leak, investigative reporters and prison rights activists looked into Black Veil's operations on their own and found a long history of abuse, psychological warfare, and systemic neglect that was hidden behind layers of bureaucratic procedures. Former employees who spoke on the condition of anonymity called the facility a human control experiment. One former assistant guard said that the prison followed an unofficial set of rules for high-level prisoners called the Core Protocol. This protocol included full prisoners in this program were put through sensory deprivation, timed humiliation exercises, and a series of unrecorded evaluation sessions that took place in rooms without official supervision. The prisoners were allegedly given skewed recordings of their own trials that were sent out through the prison's internal communication system at night. These recordings were played over and over again and changed to include sounds of laughter, screams, or the names of victims. Food was flashing lights and either very salty or not salty at all. Days were lengthened or shortened by changing the clocks and lighting. One former guard is now a prisoner. In Hiding Abroad, wrote about the mental breakdown of a prisoner who had been locked up alone for 3 years. At night, he told himself that the sun had exploded and the outside world had disappeared. By the time we dropped him off at General Pop, he had forgotten his own name and thought he was stuck in a time loop. This wasn't just mental torture. The facility had a history of physical abuse. In 2018, a report was sent to the office of the Inspector General that listed many injuries in prisoners that couldn't be explained. Medical records of these injuries were either lost or signed by people who weren't supposed to be there. While the investigation was kept quiet, sources now say that the results were buried to avoid a public scandal. What's more disturbing is that Rick Harrison's appearance wasn't the cause of these conditions. They were just giving the prison a new target in him. The staff reportedly saw a unique opportunity in him, a once famous man who had dethroned a person who millions of people followed. Now reduced to people were obsessed with his fall, which gave guards, wardens, and management a way to hide their worst crimes under the guise of justice. Leaked documents from inside the facility showed that Rick had been marked during intake because of the media attention and the value of his public image. Next to his name was a handwritten note that said, "Do not contact without permission." Insiders say that permission came from a small group of administrators who were not officially named, though the people who kept track of Rick controlled all of his interactions with others, watched how he behaved, and decided what privileges, if any, he would be given while writing notes on him. Journalists got a copy of the notes, which showed things like meal refused and called slop as possible hallucinations, needed photo of family denied, and cried for 2 hours and started repeating sounds tonight. This was not rehabilitation, it was conditioning. Sources said that the guards were divided, with some being upset by what they saw. Others were seen quietly quitting or asking to be transferred, while others enjoyed watching Rick's mental health get worse. One former staff member said that in the first few weeks of Rick's confinement, he was seen standing in the dark and staring at the wall. When I passed by, he turned and asked, "Do you hear the judgment? It never stops." Then he let out a dry, terrible laugh. In another incident recorded in the internal report, Rick was if you asked a guard what happened, they said it was an administrative mistake. But video from the hallway showed the guard laughing as he turned off the heater by hand. Then there was the photo. Several guards testified anonymously that the picture of the gold and silver pawn shop that Rick held in the viral video was not allowed in his cell because personal items had to be requested and approved through a strict system of approvals. How he got it is unknown. Some people think that the incident was set up by staff as an experiment to see how he would react if the manipulation wasn't passive but active. Former prisoners have also started to speak out. Some of them have described similar conditions: no sunlight, fake medical records, food that was laced with sedatives or stimulants, and being forced to look at flickering and erratic lights. One man, who is now in a holding facility, said that he had been watching Rick from a cell across the hallway. Every time he started to calm down, they would turn up the noise level and the game lights. One night I heard clips from his show, but the voices were distorted and high-pitched, like demons. He screamed until he passed out. Officials continue to deny any wrongdoing, even though there is a lot of evidence. A short statement from the Federal Bureau of Prisons said, "All inmates are treated according to established federal guidelines and laws. We take allegations of misconduct seriously and are reviewing the matter. But the review, if it exists, hasn't led to any results, updates, or accountability." Meanwhile, Rick's condition keeps getting worse. Recent reports say he can't speak in full sentences anymore and only talks in whispered, broken-up words that he doesn't recognize as his own name. He spends hours lying in a fetal position reciting numbers and dates, talking to Chester more than anyone else. And the prison keeps running as usual because the public pressure keeps building up without being able to be stopped. Human rights groups are calling for congressional hearings and civil lawsuits are being prepared, but the bureaucracy moves slowly and the damage has already been done. Rick Harrison may be the most well-known victim of Black Veil's brutality behind prison walls, but maybe he is not the only victim. He is just the one we are allowed to watch, and that's the scariest part. As footage of his breakdown goes viral around the world and reports of his abuse inside prison walls get stronger, there is one question that people keep asking: where is his family? For years, the name Harrison was linked to a close-knit business, with a father and son working together to make it work in Las Vegas and even thrive. Corey Harrison, Rick's son, was the main character of Pawn Stars. Their casual banter was both entertaining and what made the show so charming. Viewers felt like they were watching a real family business built on tradition. When the severity of Rick's crimes became public and his physical and mental decline became an internet obsession, that image was shattered. Corey Harrison disappeared without a statement, interview, or social media post. At first, there was only silence. Fans thought that Corey might be preparing a formal speech, something sincere to acknowledge the chaos without fully accepting or condemning it. Others thought that Corey was also caught off guard that his father had. As the days went by, rumors started to spread. Were Corey afraid of testifying against himself? Was he working with the police behind the scenes? Was he embarrassed, suffering, or relieved that no one knew, not even his closest family members? An anonymous friend of the Harrisons said that Corey had cut off all contact with Rick after he was sentenced. He turned off his phone, closed his private social media accounts, and even sold the house he was living in. It was as if he wanted to others noticed that Corey's Instagram, which used to be full of photos from the pawn shop and Vegas nights, hadn't been updated in months. His most recent post was an old picture of him and his grandfather Richard Benjamin Harrison, which got both angry and supportive comments. The caption read, "You taught me how to work hard. You taught me how to be a man. Rest in peace." Since that post, nothing, no replies, no Ed. It's no likes. The silence grew deafening when TMZ attempted to approach Corey outside a convenience store in Henderson, Nevada. The 15-second clip showed Corey walking quickly to his car. When asked if he had anything to say about his father's situation in prison, he simply replied, "No comment." For people who are used to celebrities speaking out about even the smallest scandals, Corey's refusal to do so stood out. That space was filled with theories. Some people thought Corey was involved in his father's illegal activities. Others thought he might have become a state witness in exchange for immunity. A darker group of people thought he had fully accused Rick and didn't want to deal with the consequences. But amid all the noise, another question began to emerge. Is Corey Harrison, a victim and a former employee of the pawn shop, started speaking out anonymously? One person said that in the years before Rick was arrested, Corey had become less involved with the business. They said that Corey stopped coming to the shop every day and that Rick took more control of everything. Corey just smiled for the cameras and did what he was told. Another former employee remembered a time when Corey was said to have asked Rick about the authenticity of a high-value item that was sold in an off-camera deal. Corey tell him to ignore the fact that the buyer doesn't care if it's true or not, they're just buying a story. It's still not clear if Corey knows the full extent of his father's actions, but people who were there say his emotional response after the arrest was raw and immediate. He cried for hours. A family friend said, "I think he knew part of the truth, but he didn't want to believe the whole picture. When it was finally revealed, it destroyed him." Some fans defended Corey's decision to stay quiet, saying that he shouldn't have to talk about such a complicated and personal matter. Others accused him of being a coward, saying that by not speaking out, he was protecting himself at the expense of honesty. Corey wasn't the only family member to stay quiet. Rick's youngest son, Jake, has also avoided the spotlight by not appearing on the show or making any public statements. Rick's ex-wife Kim has also refused to talk about the situation. No one in Rick Harrison's family has talked to the press or done any interviews. This complete secrecy only adds to the public's obsession. When a celebrity like Rick Harrison falls, the public wants to react. They want confessions, emotions, and recognition. When none of those things are given, they make up their own stories on online forums, fan pages, and conspiracy threads. People start to argue about not only Rick's crimes, but also what they say about American culture. What does it say when a people who sell historical stories hide such dark secrets for a family business that could have been built on charm but fell apart under the weight of silence? Protests broke out outside the History Channel headquarters. Angering former fans demanded to know why the network hadn't done a deeper investigation into Rick's business dealings when the first rumors came out. The network didn't just promote Rick, it made him famous. Others, especially those who want to change prison conditions, saw Rick's fall as he wasn't just a famous person losing credibility. At a protest, an activist said, "He's the canary in the coal mine. If this is how they treat someone the whole world is watching, imagine what happens to those we never hear about." Meanwhile, online culture moved quickly, chaotically, and brutally as usual. Memes were everywhere. TikTokers reenacted prison scenes with impressive voiceovers, and YouTube users made hour-long video essays called Pawn Star or Psychopath. Reddit threads talked about what Rick's actions might mean, Chester's real identity, and possible secrets that are still buried. But not everyone was laughing. A smaller part of the internet started to show something different: sadness. Sadness for the fall of a man they used to admire. Sadness for a family that has been broken up. Sadness for realizing that even the most normal and American people could be hiding something dark and unseen beneath the surface. And at the heart of that pain is Corey Harrison was torn between his father's legacy and the truth, between memory and reality, and between who the world saw him as and who he could have been. His silence has become an iconic statement. If you find this story interesting, please share your thoughts in the comments. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next exciting video in this dramatic series.